just wanted to say, for those who are in the room that may be here as guests, if you're not yet a member of the Economic Club of Miami, we would love to have you. You can find our website, econclubmiami.org, and visit. We'll be having a lot of great events. You know, we've recently hosted Ken Griffin and Peter Thiel and Joe Lonsdale, and now we get the honor of having Justin Sayfie and Congressman Byron Donalds. And so I'm going to allow our board chair, Jeremy Schwarz, to introduce these men here. Thank you guys so much for being here.
So first off, a good afternoon. You know it is a serious event in Miami where half of the room is wearing ties. It's but nevertheless, despite the weather, we're going to give a warm Florida welcome to Congressman Byron Donalds, his wife Erika Donalds, who's here as well today, and of course, so many people across the South Florida ecosystem. I know that it has been said that Florida is where woke goes to die, but I would also like to say Florida is where freedom comes to thrive. We have a growing ecosystem of investment and innovation, and we are thrilled to welcome the Congressman and Justin Sayfie to conduct a conversation on the future of Florida's economy, Florida's economic future. Our guest today, Congressman Donalds, is a native Floridian of sorts. He was born and raised in the northern section of Miami Beach, known as Brooklyn. He is a proud graduate of the Florida State University. Go Noles for those who are here. I know we've got a couple of Canes fans. His background, unlike many elected officials, is actually in finance and economics and business administration. So he has been part of the growing ecosystem that has thrived in South Florida, in Southwest Florida, actually. He has been a member of the Florida House of Representatives and now currently represents Southwest Florida for the United States House of Representatives. And as you know, he has spoken out forcefully on issues of economic freedom, fiscal prudence, and school choice, which Florida has benefited from, especially now with the growth of our region. One of the most important questions is, where can I find a good school for my kids now that I've moved to Florida? Justin Sayfie, who will be interviewing him today, needs no introduction. He is the founder and creator and owner of the Sayfie Review, which is known as the proverbial Drudge Report of the state of Florida. And his background is he is a Kane graduate and a Georgetown Hoya, and has sat on a number of federal and state boards. Governor Scott obviously nominated him to sit on the JNC, the Judicial Nominating Committee, and President Trump nominated him to serve as a member of the White House Fellows Commission. So we are incredibly grateful, and we are going to, without further ado, start the conversation on Florida's economic future. So thank you both gentlemen for coming, and thank you, Congressman, for talking about this important topic. I leave the floor to you guys.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for that introduction. And let me thank the Economic Club of Miami for hosting this conversation, and Jeremy and Jeb Jr. and Francisco and everyone who helped put this together. It's great to be here. Lots to talk about. It's obvious to say that Miami has a number of different aspects to its economic future, as well as Florida. Tourism is obviously the #1 industry, but when I worked for Jeb Bush, he wanted to help diversify Florida's economy, and now we have the leadership of Mayor Schwarz here in Miami, and that diversification has continued and continues to grow. One of the most important aspects for Miami is international trade. We have a huge port, lots of cargo and containers come through that port. It's an important part of our Miami economy. And we just saw the news over the weekend about President Trump announcing with China that there was going to be a 90-day pause on the 145% tariffs on China. So could you just address a little bit what your view is on the way President Trump has handled the relationship with China and with the rest of the world in terms of his tariff policies, and whether you think they'll be ultimately successful?
Well, it's a great question, but before I do that, thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy days. I know if you are in business, finance, especially in this period of time, coming to lunch is interesting. So I appreciate you being here. To get to the point, I think when it comes to the president's view, it's really been about resetting the dynamics of global trade. That's always been my view of it. I think tariff policy was a conduit to trying to reset some of the trade agreements, probably a rehashing of what trade enforcement was going to look like. And let me pause on trade enforcement for a second. The number one thing that the United States has been terrible at is enforcing trade deals. And the reason why we've been terrible at enforcing trade deals is because we have been the biggest game in town, the most dominant team on the planet, and we just didn't have to. And I think the analogy I like to use, and I think it helps people understand, is that our economy has been the '92 Dream Team. That's what our economy has been. If you follow basketball and Olympic basketball, it was Michael, Magic, Larry, Patrick, Charles, Stockton, Malone. You could go out there and beat any country by 50 points without really breaking a sweat. You didn't have to practice. You didn't really have to stretch. Just put the ball out there and we'll go dominate. I think the famous quote from Charles Barkley is, "I don't know anything about Angola, but they're in trouble," right? That's the quote. Our Olympic basketball team today has to actually be a team. They have to go to training camp. They have to stretch. They got to do film study. They got to work on defensive sets. They got to work on offensive sets. It's a completely different ball game. It is no difference in Olympic basketball than it is in global economics. The United States doesn't have the luxury of just ignoring the enforcement of trade deals anymore. Other countries have caught up. China definitely has caught up economically. So what it requires is, frankly, trying to use the stick of tariff policy to reset what the next wave of global trade is going to look like. The in-between phase has been very bumpy. I was at the White House on Liberation Day. I kind of got a preview of what was going to come about 2 days before. And I couldn't say anything because the president was making some final determinations. But that being said, for me, the game plan has always been about resetting global trade and then reasserting ourselves when it comes to trade enforcement. I think we're on the way to doing that now. People would ask, what's the president's real mission? And my answer has always been that President Trump is a realist. He's not an ideologue. That's our relationship. That's how I view him in all the conversations that we've had. He's a realist. He's going to look at all the dynamics as they're happening in real time, and then he's going to make the decisions based upon how things are going. In short, he's going to play it as it lies. And so I think what we've seen with China and the United States, obviously Secretary Bessent being in Switzerland, working with the Chinese and his counterparts to try to hammer out what looks to be a framework of how each country is going to operate going forward. The deal last week with Great Britain, there are other deals that are going to be coming into the fold. And I will argue all this stuff is at the beginning, not the end. And so I think what we're going to see over the next, I think the initial stuff, which will help capital markets, really help the stock market and futures, that stuff's all going to probably occur over the next 2 to 3 months. I think you're going to see these deals kind of become, I guess a lot of the details are going to be scribbled in probably over the next couple of months. I know that the United States Trade Office is working overtime because I'm talking to them about just about every deal that affects Florida, because people come to me, I talk to them, so on and so forth. So I know they're working incredibly hard. Secretary Bessent, I talked to him the other day. I know they're doing, there's real work that's going on there. But at its core, it's about putting the United States on a fairer playing field with other countries. The president does want to bring manufacturing back to the United States. I want to see manufacturing come back to the United States. Will it come back to the degree that it was in the 80s? Not sure. That remains to be seen. A lot of that deals with permitting issues in the United States. Can you actually build plants quick enough? What are going to be the work requirements on our plants here in the United States, et cetera? And nobody wants to go back to the manufacturing plants of the 30s. Nobody wants to do that, but we have to be realistic about what it actually costs and takes to manufacture product. That's going to be a big piece of it. I think overall, if you want to ask me my views, which I think coincide with the president's views, is that in short, we have to reassert the Monroe Doctrine. And what I mean by that from an economic standpoint is a lot of the supply chains that have moved off to Asia, we need to see a lot of them either come back to the United States or come back to our hemisphere and actually have real economic ties with countries in the Caribbean, in Central America, in South America, as opposed to what the last 30 years has been, which is really a bunch of aid money coming out of USAID, hoping our neighbors to the south of us play well with us because we're funding a lot of their budgets through the back door. I think it's a very different environment going forward. I believe if we do this right, it'll be to the betterment, not just of American business, but American multinationals, and really to the entire hemisphere of our side of the globe.
What issues do you see as important? You mentioned that you spoke to Secretary Bessent. What are you watching closely for in terms of how these trade deals impact the state of Florida?
For Florida, really, it's more about enforcement than anything else. You mentioned tourism. Let's talk ag, the other part of the three-legged stool, right? Our farmers, for the longest time, have been really hurt by dumping of produce and dumping of crops here in America. We actually grow a lot. Like if we had to just look at the output from Florida farms, it would be more than enough to feed Floridians. Let's bring this to scale. But our farmers are hurt by dumping that occurs from Central and South America. That is a fact. So I think for the farming community in Florida, and really for any other manufacturing that exists in Florida, it's really about enforcement. Enforcement is key. There are some good deals that I think are in the process of being readjusted. I'll talk to one specifically from my congressional district. It's a leather manufacturer, but they have a plant in the Dominican Republic, so CAFTA, DR is important to them. As I understand it, I think the Dominicans came in thinking they had a better hand than they thought. And so, but as I just got off the phone a couple hours ago, that deal's kind of being worked through right now. There's been further conversations on that. I think that's going to land well. At its core, for Florida's markets, enforcement is critical, especially when it comes to ag.
You also are on the Financial Services Committee in the House, and Miami has seen over the last 5 years the growth of a tech industry here in this city and this region. A lot of during the pandemic, a lot of companies, investors, equity funds came here, and of course, again, Mayor Schwarz famously promoted cryptocurrency, and you've been very active and informed on this issue in your role on the Financial Services Committee. So that's something that's very important to this community. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between what we saw in the Biden administration and the Trump administration approach, and what your view is about the future of cryptocurrency and fintech, generally speaking, as well?
Well, first of all, it's night and day. Like, there's really no comparison to the outlook from the two administrations. The Biden administration, I would argue, largely the Democrat Party, not in total, but largely, was completely opposed to digital assets, cryptocurrency, other modes of being able to transact. They were trying to essentially shove the digital assets community into the banking regulatory environment of anti-money laundering and know your customer stuff. Like they tried to basically drop the arcane regulatory environment of US banking onto digital assets. That was the goal of Maxine Waters, Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, who thank God is no longer with us, and several people in that party. The White House, the Biden White House, went down that line. President Trump, and this goes back to him being a realist. During the campaign, as people were starting to go to him and talk about the issue sets facing America today going forward, that's where this community in particular, the digital assets community in Miami and really in South Florida overall, we're starting to have more communications with the Trump campaign. And to the president's credit, when he sees a good idea, he's like, "Ooh, that's a good idea. What about this?" And so he's really embraced it. On Capitol Hill, last Congress, we passed Fit 21. We are now going to expand Fit 21. And so I believe, I think the first thing we're going to do is market structure legislation, which is actually going to create a digital assets regulatory environment in the United States. The White House is fully on board. I saw David Sachs in the White House about 2 weeks ago. We had this conversation. David Sachs is fully on board, obviously. The president is fully on board with it. Chairman Hill in the House, Chairman Scott in the Senate. So this is where we're going. The anticipation is we'll be done sometime after budget reconciliation. We also are going to move stablecoin legislation. That's also going to move this Congress. Now, the reason why I'm confident that we can get 60 votes in the Senate is because I think you do have Democrat senators. Notice I didn't say the entire Democrat Party. I just said the vast majority. You do have Democrat senators who want to see a regulatory environment stand up, because this is a $1 trillion industry just sitting at our keyboards if we're smart enough to realize it and just allow for it to flourish here in the United States. Miami will be its home. Miami is just really the natural home, and you can blame the northern states and some of the blue states around COVID, but it's also that Miami is an international hub. So this is a natural home for the digital assets community. And so what I think you're going to see happen over the next decade or so is that we're going to create the regulatory framework. The Trump administration is fully supportive of this. They want to see this happen. And then the investment here in Miami, in Broward, in Palm Beach, really this coast, in Hillsborough County, Tampa, in Duval County, Jacksonville, where a lot of the fintech companies are bringing staff there, that's going to be critical. I think for the future of the state, what's going to be important are data centers and power. Those are going to be the two critical things for the state of Florida. So it's to delve a little bit into energy, and I'll stop. We cannot rely on solar arrays and battery farms for the amount of baseload power that we're going to need, not just for digital assets, but for the entire future of Florida's economy. We're going to need SMRs. We're going to need micro-reactors. We're going to be able to we're going to need that to create the necessary baseload power for all the energy consumption needs that Florida is going to have going forward. And it's going to come at us very, very fast the second that President Trump signs legislation for a digital assets regulatory environment.
So energy is an interesting issue, but one more question on crypto. You announced legislation back in March to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a U.S. digital asset stockpile. Can you tell us what those would accomplish and why you support it?
Well, in short, the president came out with an executive order about 2 months ago now, I want to say. And so when we read the EO, we said, you know what, this actually needs to be formalized in law. So we took the president's EO, we drafted it in legislative language, and we're pushing that right now. I think it's critical because, one, the way Bitcoin is constructed, in particular, it's a holder of value. And the truth is, a holder of value is whatever people say a holder of value is. It's really all in the eye of the beholder. Gold was a holder of value, not just today, because you could have analytical reports on gold reserves and gold deposits and future gold access points. It's a holder of value for millennia because people decided it had value. And so as long as you have something where you have enough people that decide it has value, it has value. Bitcoin is one of those things. It's not going anywhere, especially because now you can have a full understanding of the construction of how Bitcoins come into being, the fact that there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins ever allowed, etc. So it does make sense from a value perspective, especially with the way we debase our dollar because we spend too much money to have, as a government, it's important to have a holder of value in the event of. It's like a rainy day fund. If you have excess cash, you set up a rainy day fund. That's what you do. Makes no sense to not do that as well. And so the crypto reserve it goes along the same premise. If there is corresponding value and if the federal government has access resources to be able to hold that, we should hold that. I'm not saying that replaces Fort Knox. I'm not saying that. That's if we actually know what's in there, but I digress. I'm not saying that, but at the same time, we should begin to go down that line. There's nothing wrong with the federal government deciding to say, you know what, maybe we should try to get with the times a little and understand that there's other ways to bring value to the balance sheet of the United States. It's more than just strategic gold and strategic oil.
So you mentioned energy before, and one of the main goals of this administration, the Trump administration, is to put the U.S. in a better position with the strategic competition with China on artificial intelligence. Yes. And one of the rate-limiting factors on winning that competition is, as you said, energy production, energy supply, energy load. Florida is not really known as a data center state. Should it be? Should we have more data centers in Florida? And if so, how are we, in either case, how are we going to handle the increased demand for energy for whether we have data centers or not, or just the load that our growth of our state's going to require? What's the best way to do it?
Well, first, I think we have to start getting into that mindset of what Florida can be going forward, not what it's already been, because we have now become an everything state. We're not just a retirement state anymore. We're not just an ag state. We're not just a tourism state. We're not even just a college state anymore. I know I'm a Knoll. I know I'm in Canes country, but that's okay. We love each other except when it's a football game, and that's all right. But we are now a state for everybody. If you talk to people who've been in a state for any semblance of time, Florida is really like 5 states anyway. You have, southern Georgia, Miami's Miami. Southwest Florida is really a cut of the Midwest. The Panhandle's lower Alabama. Then you kind of got the heartland, right? It's already kind of 5 states. We have more people moving here in finance and tech. So as a derivative of that, you're going to have data centers, tech firms, et cetera. We need to embrace that, not run away from that. And the beauty of our state, unlike New York or Illinois, where their regulatory environments are atrocious, or California, where they basically just destroyed themselves because they're dumb and don't know how to govern. We are wide open. We have actual land. I mean, not here in Miami, but we have actual land in our state that is still pristine, available to use. We can build out that stuff and still maintain the beauty of our state. We can actually do both in Florida. If you, obviously we're here in Miami, you go up to around the Kennedy Space Center, where Governor DeSantis, myself, Senator Scott, Senator Moody, the entire congressional delegation, bipartisan, we're all pushing to have the new NASA headquarters be relocated to Brevard County. The purpose of moving NASA there is for them to be able to work directly in concert with SpaceX, with Blue Origin, with L3. We do all the launches here in Florida. That's going to continue, not dissipate. We do them all here. So you have the building blocks with Florida Institute of Technology, with Florida Poly. You have the building blocks for a tech hub, really in the central to northern part of our state. Not to discount Miami, because it kind of will flourish everywhere, but the actual infrastructure, you have the land, you have the ability, you have the region to do that in our state. So it's really about thinking constructively about what the next decade, the next 2 decades looks like for Florida. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. We're still gonna have the beaches. They're gonna look great. Miami's still gonna be Miami. Some of you are young. I'm glad you're here. You guys look spry. That's excellent. Orlando is still going to be Disney and Universal, but we can do all those things. I think from an energy perspective, that's why solar arrays concern me, because you take a lot of land out of production for a power output that does not yield, in my view, the highest and best use of the parcel. I would rather build a data center in one of these deals, or probably 4 data centers in one of these solar arrays, and put an SMR underneath it. And then whatever power is not being used off the SMR can actually be put back on the grid for other uses. That's far more efficient. That's a higher capacity of use for that land and for the resources that our state has. So it might sound like I'm very dovish on solar power and wind power. That's just because I am, because it doesn't yield the power needs that not just Florida needs, but America needs. So why would we do that?
I believe we're going to open it up for questions. So I got maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up for others who want to ask Congressman Donalds some questions. What concerns you most about the future of Florida? What do you think that Florida policymakers ought to put front and center as the number 1, number 2 priority, top priorities for the future of the state of Florida?
The thing that concerns me overall is if we just don't have vision for what the future can be. People are going to come to Florida. It's great. Free state of Florida. Love it. People are going to come here regardless. The question is, do we have a vision for what the future can actually be? My vision is we're going to be the financial hub of the world in a decade. We're going to be bigger than Davos. We're going to be bigger than London. We're going to be bigger than Singapore. New York and Chicago, please. They're done. Like, it's here. Do you have a vision for it? Can you look at it and then say, okay, what are the regulatory building blocks? What are the taxing building blocks? What are the policy building blocks that we have to put into place to realize the vision when you already know people want to come to you anyway? You know, the guys who are here now from New York because of the COVID migration, they're all like, I should have done this 20 years ago. The people who haven't left, they're just thinking about, where am I educating my kids? Where am I getting my workforce? And can I build my plants? Well, let's address all those things. So I would say for the future of Florida, it's really about the vision from Tallahassee. Is Tallahassee going to think about Florida 15, 20 years into the future? Or is Tallahassee going to think about just Florida today and not give much thought to that? And not just the thoughts. You could say these things, but I was over here talking to Mateo and some of the guys at this table, and they were asking about campaigns. And I said, look, every campaign is really like a startup. It's a startup. That's what they are. You have to figure out your product. That's me. You have to figure out your marketing team. You know, can they pull it together? You got to figure out if the market wants to accept it. By the way, it kind of does. And then so you go through the process of day in, day out. What are your strategies? What are your deliverables? What's your GYR? Who's doing what? Rinse and repeat, day in, day out. That's how you build a campaign. That's how you build a small business. That's how you move a state from where it is today, which is the best state in the country. We're the best run. We really are. I've seen enough. We're the best run state in the country. The question is, how do you take it from here to there? And so if you ask me what concerns me most, do we have and this is not against Governor DeSantis. Governor DeSantis has done a great job for our state, but he's terming out. So what comes next?
And my final question, and we'll open it up to others. It's been mentioned a few times today, education. If we're going to achieve that vision, we need to also have the intellectual capital being produced in the state, whether it's space industry or the crypto industry, financial capital of the world, et cetera. Could you just comment on your view of our higher education system in Florida, our K through 12 system? How do you assess it, and where do you think it needs to go from here?
K-12 is okay. The university system is great. We're the best university system in the country, one of the best in the world. K-12 is good. But remember, we're good for America. America is not good. So in my view, the first overarching goal is we have to raise the standards of not just meeting grade level, but we have to meet proficiency standards in core subjects. If a child is reading proficiently and doing math proficiently at the 3rd grade, what are his real economic prospects by the time he reaches senior year of high school, senior year of college? Because if you're going to try to do, one of my roommates in college was an engineering major, short-lived, didn't work out. But he showed me e-math. And I looked at that thing and I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. It looked like Klingon to me. I had no idea what it was, right? And I'm a math guy. So what I'm saying is that we have to make sure that kids are proficiently doing math, and they're proficiently reading, they're proficiently writing, at each grade level. The question is, how do you do that? Teachers are scarce. Facilities, we'll get into that in a minute. So one of the things I think the state needs to do going forward is we actually need to have a regulatory sandbox for quantum computing and AI. And I think addressing all aspects of not just government, but of Florida's economy. I think specific to education, there are fledgling interests in this now, where you could have personalized AI tutoring models for a child as a support system to parents, to the teachers and to parents. So imagine the feedback of a child who has their own module that they deal with day in, day out, as opposed to waiting for some test to get scored, to get back to the teacher, to get back to the parent. You're now getting day in, day out responses, week in, week out responses. They don't have to be day by day, unless you're just kind of that parent, then you could do it day by day. But that kind of feedback is critical. Anybody that's played sports, that's the feedback you get as an athlete. Young athletes get that feedback day in, day out. Our 13-year-old son, I got him up. He woke up and I woke up, took him to the weight room at 6:15 this morning. He was in the weight room this morning. He's 13 years old. His oldest brother, my oldest son, played college football. He's graduating. My middle son is trying to figure out if he's going to play college basketball. It looks like that's going to happen. The question is where. He's now 13 saying, all right, well, what's my thing? And we're just sitting around the table, and I said, got to get in the weight room. It's a day in, day out thing. Well, if that's how we train our athletes, that's how we have to train our scholars. It's a day in, day out thing. And if we do that, you raise the bar. Second thing, around our scholarship accounts in Florida, it's been great for a lot of families. What we're realizing now, every private school is basically full with a waiting list. Every charter school is basically full with a waiting list. So we have to help these institutions be able to build out infrastructure. That's not to diminish the public school system. They have capital access to build out infrastructure, but the state has to meet that moment. So to your point, if we now have kids progressing, finding the institutions that suit their best, they are now at proficiency, so you're not having to remediate them when they go to state college or university, and now they're on a trajectory to excel. And you have companies coming in because they've chosen Florida as their home because we have a great business climate. We made it better. We actually created a business litigation court to kind of get some of our higher level corporate stuff out of the civil litigation courts, get faster responses, have that moving through. Now you've addressed the owner's situation about his kids, and frankly, the C-suite and their kids. And now you've also answered the other question about where's the talent coming? Because Florida is making sure that the talent is on trajectory coming out of high school. There you go.
Thanks. Francisco, any questions?
I think you have a couple in the back.
Here we got one right here.
Thank you so much for your insights and your wonderful work. Just two quick questions. One, where, from your perspective, where do you see the status of the beautiful bill, the one big beautiful bill, particularly, given recent comments from some of the blue state Republican representatives around the SALT deduction, around potential tax increases on the wealthy. Pragmatically, where do you see that? And then secondly, just on your point with the Monroe Doctrine specifically pertaining to China and Venezuela, you may know Nicolas Maduro was in Moscow this weekend with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. What's the prospect there, particularly Venezuela and its energy importance for Florida?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. First, with the one big beautiful bill, I still think we'll get it done. I will just tell you there's going to be some furniture moving going on in Washington this week, probably by me. And the reason why I say that is, look, to my colleagues in New York and California, God bless them, but there is no way that we're going to give $500 billion in SALT subsidies to New York and California while they go after hospitals in Florida. It ain't going to happen. It just ain't gonna happen. So I've already been making these calls with the relevant people about this. Look, I get it if you're a Republican in New York and California. They're tough districts anyway, but we cannot go through this process of saying we're gonna cut mandatory spending, but then we're giving out subsidies, quite frankly, to people who are at the top 1.5% of the income ladder in blue states. That is exactly what SALT is. And so, yeah, I get it. They lost a bunch of people, quite frankly, to Southwest Florida. So they've come to me. And I get it. Fix your state. Like, that's a New York problem. It's not a Florida problem. I'd be open to it if we were doing fundamental things in Medicaid in particular that help to address the overall mandatory spending problem that Washington has. Because the reason why I could be okay with the SALT is because the trajectory of mandatory spending is just not sustainable. The amount of borrowing the federal government would have to do, I don't think it would crowd out private investment, but it would to a degree. It'll raise the yields on private investment. The borrowing costs start going up pretty rapidly. And that's a detriment to every venture fund, pension fund, small business, entrepreneur, existing business, and families. Because those higher yields, those higher borrowing costs directly impact poor people more than anybody else. I mean, if you got money, you'll figure it out. It'll be tough, but you'll get there. So that's where I think the one big beautiful bill is. I think we're going to get there, but it's going to be an interesting week this week, especially in the House. Venezuela. I think the only real way we can get our arms around them over the long term is, one, this is where moving manufacturing out of Asia in particular is helpful to us, because what the Chinese are doing right now is they're now moving they're opening plants in other areas in Asia that are really their plants, but they're just held by some subsidiary in that other country. So we have to actually bring a lot of that stuff. And that's why I think nearshoring is so important to that. I look at Haiti. Haiti is actually not just in Florida's interest, it's in America's interest. If you could figure out the security situations in Haiti and actually build manufacturing infrastructure there with their ports, and then you have a direct conduit here, specifically obviously to the Miami ports, but really to the United States, that stuff is massive. We used to actually do pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico. Gone. We don't do it there anymore. So bringing that stuff back is really critical to us. If you have that where America has more control over its supply chains, you now have more control over economic power. You have more control over economic power, it puts Maduro in a box. It tightens that noose a little bit. Depending on the foreign policy dynamics, and I don't want to get in front of the president, you might have some other options you can get to that are more than just, not military, but they're more stringent economic issues that you can use. But the Venezuela thing is a problem because China, while we've been fighting amongst ourselves as Americans politically, China's been on the move in Central and South America. We have got to mind the store if we're going to be serious about the future of the country.
Thank you for joining us. Very much enjoyed your remarks. My name is Chris Hunter. You mentioned Dubai, Singapore, this vision of Miami exceeding them as a financial center. Love the dream, love the enthusiasm. I spent a lot of time in the Emirates personally. The infrastructure there feels decades ahead. You go to, you see what the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey has done in redeveloping LaGuardia, Newark, JFK. It's a different world. How can we get a world-class airport here in Miami?
So I would argue, and by the way, thank you for that. I do agree with you that my wife loves the signage in Miami International. She does not. She does not love the signage. But we're gonna find a way to get that done. Like, I think first, if you're gonna talk to New York, they didn't decide to do it out the goodness of their hearts. They used federal money to do it. That's what they did. They used a bunch of federal money to do it. So I think that the infrastructure pieces, the president, this is something that he wants to do. I know JD wants to do this as well. We have to up the game on our infrastructure. The other thing that's going to be critical to this, I think this is where I do believe this is where the next wave of manufacturing comes into play. There are a couple of firms already here in the United States that essentially, I'm not saying it's quite AI yet, but they're doing a lot of 3D printing manufacturing. Some of the stuff is being used in DoD contracts because DoD is having the hardest time sourcing material. Because guess what? A bunch of our component pieces, they're not made here. We get them overseas. Unfortunately, we get a chunk of them in China. So I think it's about our domestic manufacturing capacity. If you could find a way to start machining screws, beams, all that stuff in the United States, again, it makes it easier for us to upgrade our infrastructure here in the United States. Right now, the cost associated with getting that product here is astronomical. So I think the future of our infrastructure is really thinking through how can we scale the next level of tech and industry to provide the material in a way that's more cost effective to address those infrastructure needs. Specific to just road construction here in Miami and really throughout the state, what we've not done in Florida, to my knowledge, and I talked with some of the FDOT guys on this, what we've not done is we've not decided to really take the next leap forward into tech to make our intermodal systems far more efficient. We still rely on doing traffic counts to decide how we're going to sequence lights. You guys can see how well that's going here. And that's no disrespect to the city of Miami, to Miami-Dade County, or to the MPO. We just haven't taken that step forward into that. I think that's just as important, if not more important, than does our airport look like LaGuardia. The new LaGuardia is great. The previous LaGuardia, that thing was a relic of the 1900s. Like Miami International looked way better than the previous LaGuardia. I can say that because I'm a recovering New Yorker, so I get to talk about LaGuardia. But I agree with you. We have to do it to get the infrastructure there. But part of getting the infrastructure there is having the flow of capital, where you can visualize and make that investment because you know you have the capital flows that are going to back up your investments in those key infrastructure projects.
Well, I neglected to actually recognize, because I didn't see him in the room, Greg Ferrara. He's also on our advisory board, and he's got a question.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. With respect to supporting the crypto community and growing the crypto community, I think we enjoy a lot of benefits by having the dollar being the reserve currency of the world. How do you bring the crypto community up and grow crypto and as a currency or as a means of exchange, but at the same time not jeopardize the reserve currency of the U.S. dollar or reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar?
I mean, honestly, I think this is where stablecoins come into play. Dollar-backed stablecoins provide the runway for that to occur. To me, the way I see it, that's the quickest way. I know there's a couple of companies who are in this space and trying to, and I think the key thing is moving a USD-backed stablecoin in other parts of the world. That helps us get there. Because forget the central banks for a moment. If citizens in Africa, in Asia, have stable coins that are USD-backed, then how are their central banks going to get out of the dollar? They really can't. They're stuck. So I think that's the proliferation point that our industries in the United States have to encourage. The only way you do that is we have to get in the game and stop having our head in the sands about what the future of digital assets really are. And to be blunt, nobody really knows what the future of digital assets are. We think we do now. This is one of the reasons why I will support the regulatory bill that we're going to put through. I'll support it and I'll vote for it because we have to do something. But if you ask me what I want to do, we should just create a self-regulating organization in the industry. Let you guys do it. And then you have Treasury, OCC, SEC, CFTC. They will just essentially observe the regulator. And then, of course, if there's criminality involved, we're going to come in and prosecute and do what we got to do. But the industry is going to move too far, too fast, too swiftly for an amalgam of the CFTC and the SEC to be able to regulate it effectively. That's my only concern, is that there's not enough manpower, there's not enough technical knowledge in those agencies to efficiently regulate the industry. So I think it should be self-regulating.
Hi, sorry. When we think about legislation going forward, And you spoke about, getting things done in the Senate. If we look at the thin majority in the House, how do we think about 2026 and the midterms in 2026? How will that impact legislation going forward?
2026 is impacting everything right now. Look, I stand by the mantra, you get your work done, and then you can go talk about, then you got a shot. Like nobody wants to buy, if the Heat won 26 games, how much harder is it going to be for Mickey to sell tickets? The Heat went to the playoffs. How much easier is it for him to sell tickets? And so to me, it's no different in sports than in politics. If you actually accomplish something, now you have something to go and campaign on. If you are afraid, and look, let's just cut straight. A lot of the reasons why stuff doesn't get done in Washington is because people are afraid. They're afraid of losing seats. They're afraid of pushback in media. They're afraid of certain interest groups going after them, as opposed to getting elected, doing the thing, fighting the interest groups and fighting the media, but letting people know, here's what we accomplished and here's what it means for you. That is a far better selling point than a fear-based decision-making process. So I think everything in this Congress is set up on one big beautiful bill. Everything. That is going to take members to be able to survive re-election, or it's going to sink members. My personal view is, if we get it done and we actually do some meaningful stuff in mandatory spending, you get a twofer. One, you have now the president's trade policy stuff, which is coming more into focus, coupled with real tax policy continuation and new stuff, like 100% expensing over 4 years. That's going to be a boon to our economy. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. As a guy that worked on tips when he was in college and worked on overtime, that's massive. Are you kidding me? Especially now that tips are all electronic. Nobody has cash anymore. My wife is always like, do you have cash? Like for this person, I'm like, do they Cash App? Do they Venmo? Like, do they Zelle? If they Zelle, I got it, but I don't carry cash. So that stuff is critical for people who are out here busting their hump every single day. They're busting their hump in Miami every night, serving people drinks, opening up doors, taking their bags to the room, and all that stuff. Those are real world tax policy issues that affect them in a meaningful way. If the Medicaid stuff, the reason why it's so hard, because people say you're taking something from somebody. But the truth is, if you clean out the waste and people still get their benefits, they reward you for that. They'd be like, well, yeah, my sister was on Medicaid, but she's still on Medicaid, but they reformed it. That is a good thing, because everybody knows the nation's going broke. That's a good thing. You can run on that. We secured the border. Donald Trump did that in a week. That's a good thing. You can run on that. And so I think all these things, when you put them together, that gives you the wind in your sails to win in 26. That's what I'm trying to get some of my colleagues who are more nervous about these issues to understand. You either get the job done or you will fail. I think that majorities are the purpose of majorities is to pass agendas, not to keep majorities. That's my view. And I have colleagues who would say, well, that's easy for you to say, Byron. You're in a safe red seat. And I tell them, Byron doesn't care. He can go home tomorrow and go make money. Because, next question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I hope everyone uses your individual networks to compound your continued growth. So I'm with you on the 10-year plan. But last week, there was the press about 4-year non-competes in Florida for a very well-known financial services firms here. So what's your overall take on non-competes in Florida?
Look, my take is that, you sign a contract, you got to live by it. That's my overall take. Look, some of this stuff is just personal between you and your employer. If Ken says, come work for me, but you got to sign a 5-year non-compete deal, and go do it. Let me put it this way. My son, economics major, graduating, he's going to go, he's got a job lined up. He's going to go to work and go cut his teeth, right? If the deal was he had to sign a 5-year non-compete, he probably would have brought it to me and my wife, and depending on the company, we'd have been like, yeah, you better sign that deal. That's just, or don't sign the deal and go find. I mean, some of this stuff is just private contracts. I don't have a problem with the state allowing it to take place, but at the end of the day, that's on the individual to sign. You know, what we got to be careful of is precluding businesses from being able to extend those deals. Because being on the other side of it, having had to hire people, and the worst thing in the world is hiring somebody that you got to turn around, you lost them in 8 months to a better deal, because then you got to go through the process of finding, onboarding, do they fit, not just intellectually, do they fit culturally? All that stuff matters. So I could see both sides of it. I just say, let people sign the contracts that they want to sign. If a business wants to do a 4-year non-compete, okay, that's fine. Nobody's forcing you to sign it.
Congressman Donalds, you've publicly supported the...
oh, it's you. I thought I told you no questions. No, I was joking with him earlier. Go ahead.
I'm sneaking it in.
Go ahead.
So you've publicly supported the Opportunity Zones legislation, which is one of President Trump's favorite economic tools. As governor, would you support local Opportunity Zone enhancements like the state of Ohio has done?
That's a pretty interesting question. I'm not quite sure what Ohio did, but I'm open to enhancements. I think even opportunity zones, the one thing, I think even the people who created what they will acknowledge is the toughest part was making sure people understood the rules and the process going, how it would operate. And it probably took too long for people to figure out the rubric to basically take advantage of it and put in the necessary investment. So definitely open to that. Whatever adjustments we can make, whatever flexibility we can bring into these programs that still yield results, I'm supportive in doing. My only caveat is, at my core, I'm an analyst. So I'm fine with adjustments, I'm fine with flexibility, but we're not gonna put in flexibility that yields bad deals, because bad deals work for nobody, you know? And I would say that's akin to, you know, Fannie and Freddie back in late 90s, early 2000s, basically like, yeah, sure, you know, somebody can have a 500 credit score. It doesn't matter. No, it matters. And obviously we realized that in 08, 09, 10, 11, 12, so.
Congressman, you articulated pretty well your energy policies and how that benefits our state. I know you've also worked on some pretty progressive water policies that would both benefit our state and protect the environment. If you could talk about those a little bit.
Well, in short, when it comes to water policy, the biggest enchilada, if you will, is Lake Okeechobee and the Glades. We are probably another decade away from finishing that work. My hope is that the legislature, they get past this detente with the governor and they continue to do that work, because that's critical for the future of our state. We probably right now we have like what? Probably at least 17 million people living south of I-4 in our state and growing. So we have to address water quality issues, specifically around Lake Okeechobee. We don't have a choice. It's not just about farmers and people who live on the beach. You have cattle ranchers north of the lake. You have landowners actually in the Everglades. You have Florida Bay that needs water. The actual Everglades system needs water. We're well on our way to doing that. Now it's just finishing the work. Like, let's just be committed and be done. Let's actually do something government doesn't do. Let's actually finish the projects, and then we could close that chapter, do technical observations of the work we've done and the actual impacts, realize if there's new science to help that be better or more cost efficient. But if we do this right and we preserve the glades and actually have a healthy Lake Okeechobee, it will yield better water quality results, not just today, but for the next 30 to 50 years in our state. Like ecology is one of those things that could really trip us up off of our overall goal. So we just got to get it done, get it finished, observe what we've done, and make sure that it's sustainable. Like the biggest thing, especially in ecology, it has to be sustainable over the long term.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you very much, Congressman Donalds, for being here. I have a question that kind of goes back to something you mentioned at the very beginning. You described President Trump as a realist rather than an ideologue. And in the past 5 years, here in Florida especially, we've seen many individuals move because there's certain ideas that were being implemented in their states and their blue states, that they were certain, or at least had trust, that they would not be implemented here, certain policies. When it comes to you, if you were selected to be governor of Florida, are there some ideas, policies that are red lines that you would never implement? Are you a realist? Are you an ideologue?
That's a good question. I would probably say I'm more of an ideologue than a president. I'm a conservative. I'm actually very conservative. So if you're talking about like hardline things for me, like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, like those are things where, like, I don't care what your policy is. I know the issues that happen around guns. We know this. We're not going to take away people's rights. We're just not going to do that. And that's because of the Constitution, but it's really because of human liberty. And there are just some basic principles around human liberty that for me are non-negotiable. So I think that's kind of where if there's a hard line, that's kind of where it is, really around where the Bill of Rights are in the US Constitution. Past that, I'm pretty open. Like, I think when it comes to kids, we're going to protect kids. I firmly believe you have to protect the puberty of children. Puberty is one of those things that is non-negotiable. And to be blunt, pharmaceuticals doesn't make it negotiable. It just creates significantly more health issues for those individuals into the future. It's simply not right. So we're going to protect kids. We're going to protect their puberty. We're going to protect their innocence. We want to educate them. Life as an adult is enough. Let's not complicate childhood. And so I think, to me, those are kind of where the red lines are. Past that, obviously, when it comes to economics, I have a worldview on economics. I would say I'm much more out of the Milton Friedman, Hayek view of economics. So in short, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. So if we're going to do something as a state, and I can't see, and this goes back to my analysis mind, if I can't see where it's viable 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, odds are we're not doing it. Because then it's going to require additional subsidies that I can't visualize, which means it's a non-starter. So economically, I have my worldview economically, I have my worldview philosophically. After that stuff, let's have a conversation. Does it make sense? Is it logical? This is stuff from my mom. This is not even political. My wife's heard me say this stuff for years. Is it logical? Which is really, if you talk to my mom, that's like the first thing she ever says. Well, Byron, is it logical? And that's how she trained me as a young man. So that's how I process information. I think the broader question for you is, when you elect somebody, I don't care what the position is, what you're really electing is a decision-making process. Because the issues come and go. Justin, the issues come and go. What is that person's decision-making process? Can they articulate it? If they can't, then when you get into a lurch, you don't know what they're going to do. And it doesn't matter if you're a business or you're a religious organization, a nonprofit, whatever, that's terrifying. When you know the person who makes the decisions, you have no idea how they process information, because you don't know what's going to come out the other end.
Thanks, Congressman. Jacques Tomei, new member, great event, Francisco. About Doge, so maybe just tell us what you're involved with directly. We all read about it all the time, and maybe tell us a take or an observation that we haven't heard many times, something that you see.
So Doge is interesting. It's mostly in the domain of the executive. The House members, we get to see the reports come out like most people do. We have a subcommittee on oversight. I don't sit on that subcommittee. I chose to let other members do that subcommittee because, they have cool hearings and people get to be on TV. And I was like, you know what, I'll let them do that. Talked to the Doge guys a couple times about what they're doing. The most interesting things that are happening are in healthcare. That's where the most interesting stuff in Doge is really occurring. We had a meeting the other day. We're talking with one of the guys that's kind of like on a Doge like advisory council in the healthcare space. Roughly of like what the 4 trillion in transactions were last year. I'm gonna be super conservative, but about easily $1 trillion was wasteful or fraudulent. or duplicative, like stuff that if you really tighten the screws on how we deal with public health and public health costs, we would realize we've just been wasting so much money. And the reason why we've been wasting so much money is because everybody's afraid and everybody's trying to cover themselves. So it's better to just waste $1 trillion than to actually do it right. I think that's the stuff that DOGE is starting to really yield. And I'm not kidding. We would, in the federal government, we would rather waste $1 trillion than squeeze it and do it right. That's the truth. That's probably the most eye-opening thing. And I mean, like, you know, we 36 trillion in debt, so count them up. That's the stuff that I think is really eye-opening. I think DOGE efforts need to be held at all levels of government. Federal, state, local. Everybody's got to get into this game, because resources are tight. They're tight, you know. And I'd rather have people have access to those resources to go make money or do something for their family than we just blow it in contracts that nobody's minding the store on. I mean, somebody's making the money, but I would rather make sure we're doing it more efficiently.
First of all, let me just say thank you so much to Congressman Donalds and Justin Sayfie for being here and taking all these great questions. And we just want to say thank you to all of you for being here, for being members of the Economic Club of Miami. Before I introduce our final person, I just want to say thank you, and if you guys give them all a round of applause.